It's the big one. These are my favorite books of 2024. These books didn't necessarily come out in 2024, although some of them did. These are just the books that I read in 2024. I read 132 books in the year of 2024, which is more books than I've read in several years. So I am thrilled about that. There will be a full video where I talk about the numbers and the stats and the data more. But what I will say, even though I'm thrilled about picking up the pace of my reading, and I definitely think this year was such a joyous year for reading, like I found pleasure in reading in a way that I hadn't for a couple of years. I think I read a lot of 3 and 4 star books. Now for me, 3 stars is still a good rating. Like that's a good book. Very good. 4 stars is like, this is a great book. This book slaps. And then 5 stars is this kind of undefinable energy that a book has. The quality of the book isn't necessarily the most important thing, although it is obviously a significant contributing factor. But for me, a 5 stars book is so significantly based on like personal reaction and impact. Did it touch me in the emotions? Did it elicit some sort of reaction from me? Did it change my perspective on something? Did it leave me thinking about it? And sometimes that feeling is just based in like enjoyment and fun. And I think that's definitely the case for my absolute favorite book of the year. I'm not going to talk about these in any particular order other than saving my absolute favorite for the end. But I feel like there weren't as many books in 2024 that elicited that kind of 5-star reaction from me. Like normally I try to pull together 10 books for my like top books of the year. This year I only have 8 to talk about. And if I'm being honest, are some of these like 4 stars as opposed to 5? Maybe. I just feel like in 2024, I had fewer reads where I was like desperate to push a book into someone's hands after I'd read it. I mean, all of these books still absolutely slap. So let's just get into it. This Is How You Remember It by Katherine Prasifka. This is the second book that I've read from this author following None of This Is Serious. And I had such high expectations for this book. I felt like it was going to be unlike anything that I'd ever read before and really touch on some topics that are so important to discuss. And I thought those topics would really resonate with me personally. And they definitely did, not to the full extent that I was anticipating, but this was definitely a book that touched on topics that I would like to explore more. But essentially, this is a book that follows one young woman's relationship with the internet and how that shaped her upbringing and kind of her mental development. So she gets her first access to a computer when she is 9 years old. She is exposed to the internet relatively unsupervised. And it's about the impact that being exposed to certain adult ideas or adult topics through the internet and the mixture of feelings around shame and guilt, but also fascination and curiosity and pleasure, all kind of mixed into this confusing melting pot. And more broadly, it's a story about growing up through childhood and adolescence and all of the kind of confusing and formative things that happened across that period. And I thought it was a really intricate, intimate, and also nuanced exploration of all of those different topics. A book that snuck into this favourites list that I read in December was Fia and the Last Snow Deer by Eilish Fisher, illustrated by Dermot Flynn. So this is a novel that is told in verse. It is for children, that is set in ancient Ireland. And I found that kind of world of, you know, an Ireland that predates political turbulence, that predates colonization. I found that such a gorgeous setting. We are following a young girl named Fia who lives in this community that is under a never-ending constant winter. And there is this prophecy that tells them that there is a deer that must make a sacrifice in order for solstice to come, in order for this never-ending winter to transition into spring. And when it is suggested that Fia's snow deer should be the one to make this sacrifice, Fia and her snow deer go on this quest to find the deer mother who they believe will have the answer to how to prevent this sacrifice. It's just such a gorgeous book. I love books that are told in verse. The illustrations add so much to this. It is completely gorgeous. And yeah, I loved this. It's the only children's book that has made it onto this list. And I do have one young adult book that's on this list that I'll talk about next. But I do quickly also want to say that I've not put any books on this list that I read for work. So no books that were published by the children's and young adult branches of the publishing house where I work at even though, are some of those books deserving of being on this list? Yes. I get so much enjoyment from so many of the books that we publish, but there are 3 books in particular, actually maybe 4 books, that left a particularly huge impact for me when I read them. So I will give them an honourable mention at the end of the video. Anyway, the young adult book that is on this list is Kissing Emma by Shappi Khorsandi. I had read one Shappi Khorsandi book before, Nina Is Not Okay, and I really want to reread that one because I loved it, and similarly to this one, I just found it so impactful and unlike anything that I had read in the young adult genre. So this is about a teenage girl named Emma who doesn't really feel like she has a lot of opportunity or prospects. She comes from a background that isn't financially well off. Her and her mother end up moving back in with the grandmother, which is a situation that is just not working. They're all kind of cramped into this house. Emma doesn't get on particularly well at school. She's not particularly academic. And she sees no route for social mobility. There's no way of her kind of getting out of this situation. But Emma has always been incredibly beautiful. She has always gained a lot of attention because of her looks. And one day she is approached by 2 men that offer her a chance for social mobility. They give her an opportunity to take some modeling work, and the money that they offer her seems like a huge amount of money because of their differing perspectives. Emma has never had any money, so what she is paid for these modeling jobs is huge for her, but actually compared to the money that these men have, what she's being paid is not very much at all. And we see little by little how these men gain control over Emma. Little by little, she ends up becoming more uncomfortable with what she is doing, and this progresses darker and darker. I thought this was such a sympathetic portrayal and realistic portrayal of how girls can find themselves in these sorts of situations, and I loved that this topic wasn't shied away from. This is a reality for so many girls. In years previously, I guess it would have been girls that got into things like topless or like page tree modeling when they were quite young, and now it's more kind of social media led, and I thought it was just such an important topic that I hadn't really seen dealt with anywhere else. Also on my list is Rosewater by Liv Little. So this follows Elsie, who is 28 years old. She lives in South London. She's working at this gay bar, but obviously that's not what she wants to do with like her career. She has aspirations of becoming a writer. She is a poet. She's continuously rejected from other jobs. She's not really making progress with her poetry. She's in this kind of situationship with her colleague B, and her life is kind of spiraling out of control. It is then that she reconnects with her best friend, or former best friend, Juliet, and the intimacy of this relationship is really at the core of this novel. It's a great exploration of female queerness, of the intimacy of female friendship and the blurred lines between friendships and sexual and romantic relationships. The book explored like webcam and OnlyFans culture in a way that I hadn't seen before, and both Elsie and Juliet felt so authentic to me. Their characters were so fully and intimately fleshed out. I will say, if you don't like miscommunication between characters, this is maybe not one for you, because so much of this book could be resolved so much quicker, and so many aspects of their relationship could be resolved so much quicker if these 2 women just confessed how they feel and shared how they felt. But that's not reality. People don't do that. Also on my favourite books of the year list is Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey. This one falls into the category of, was it brilliantly written? No. Did it impact me and make me feel things? Yes, it did. This is the only like straight up romance, like pure romance, that is on this list, and it also definitely has a lot of smutty scenes. Now what I find interesting is I have read quite a few of those books this year, and I think for me they are like eating a bar of chocolate. I'm enjoying it very much. I'm doing it quite often. I'm getting no nutritional value, but I'm having fun. And for me, that is part of my whole diet of reading. Some of the books we're getting nutritional value from, they are eating our vegetables. They're like tasty vegetables. Like these are honey glazed vegetables. They're good veg. Like they're not boiled and gross. But then there are other books that are just bars of chocolate. Does that make any sense? It's important to have all of those things. I'm a pudding girl. I love sweet treats. And this book's position on this list kind of acts as a placeholder for all of the sweet treats that I read in 2025, and this is probably like the best one. And I feel like I've read so many Tessa Bailey books this year that she needed to have a book on this list. Like she needed to be represented because she was such a significant part of my reading in 2025. This is a romance between a clown, our girl, she's a clown, children's entertainer, which makes her a bit of an oddity in her family. Her family all work in like a home renovation business, and she has decided she just wants to be a clown. Meanwhile, we have Travis Ford, who is a retired baseball player. He retired early because he had like an injury and he's gone back to his hometown. He becomes a bit of a mess because he has no direction in his life, but he ends up connecting with Georgette, who is his like best friend's little sister. They enter into this fake dating situation because Travis needs to like reform his bad boy womanizer image, and Georgette wants to be taken seriously as like a grown-up woman. But obviously the chemistry between them is absolutely steaming. It is piping hot. And I found the chemistry between the characters really believable, really authentic. I've not enjoyed the other Tessa Bailey books that I have read as much as I enjoyed this one. I don't know if it's because it was just the first one I read. I don't know if it was because I got slightly bored of the home renovation business and what an important role that played in the subsequent books in this series. But I think in terms of just pure enjoyment, this book needed to be on the list. Rachel's Holiday by Marian Keyes. So I am currently reading through all of Marian Keyes' books in publication order. This is one that I read back in the Irish Readathon in March, and it's probably Marian Keyes' most well-known book. So we're following Rachel, who is living in New York City. She is spending so much of her life partying, going to these glamorous events, and then stumbling home to her boyfriend in the early hours of the morning. Then her sensible older sister shows up and tells Rachel that she is being sent to rehab, so she's going to go back to Ireland, go into rehab, because all of her family thinks she needs to kick her drug habit. But from Rachel's perspective, she does not have a problem with drugs whatsoever. And she is super judgmental of other people in the rehab. She's like, oh, I'm not like you people. Like, I'm not a drug addict. Her perception of herself is so different from other people's perception of herself. And she doesn't understand the extent of her addiction. I think Rachel is such an interesting character to be inside the head of. She's such an interesting narrator because of that warped perception. And gradually we see her get to greater grips with reality, to understand the depth of her situation and accept that she needs help. And because you see it through Rachel's perspective, you simultaneously feel sympathetic towards her because you have that intimate connection with her, but you also totally understand the frustration of her friends and her family around her and find her lack of self-awareness incredibly frustrating. And I think that was such a delicate portrait to balance, and I'm so impressed by how Marian Keyes did that. And what I always find with Marian's books is they are just incredible character studies with an incredible broader cast of characters. They're always so chunky, but they read so quickly because of her writing style. And I will continue to read all of her books. I'll definitely read at least 2 more in 2025, but I can certainly see why this is the one that is particularly applauded. Another work of Irish fiction, I have Homestretch by Graham Norton, and the fact that there are 4 Irish books on this list is pretty indicative of my reading tastes. Now, I had read a couple of Graham Norton's other books and I liked them, I enjoyed them, but they were certainly nowhere near making it onto my favourite books of the year list. But this one, oh my God, I loved this book. So the book begins in 1987 in a small rural Irish community that is shattered by a terrible car accident. Our main character Connor is one of the survivors from the accident and really struggles to return to normality of life after the trauma of this. The town is so angry, a lot of that anger is targeted towards him. He feels a huge amount of guilt following him being a survivor of this accident. So he leaves, he goes to England to start this new life, and eventually years later we follow him settled into a new life in the States. As we follow him in his adulthood, we also flash back to the 1980s and start to build up more context for what actually happened on that night. Connor has completely estranged himself from his family. He has no connection back to Ireland, no connection to his family. But one night, in a quite strange and unexpected set of circumstances, he finds himself reconnecting with his family and his past. And to a certain extent, the plot of this book is propelled by trying to find out what actually happened on that night and the revelations around the actual truth of what happened. But I think what made me adore this book was its exploration of queerness, and specifically being a gay man in Ireland growing up in the 1980s, and it shines a light on the number of gay men that the country lost because the place was not welcoming for them, because they felt like they needed to leave. And it was such a tender exploration of that. And I think because I went into it with relatively, I suppose, moderate expectations, having enjoyed a couple of Graham Norton's books, I wasn't expecting to adore this one as much as I did. And now that I'm talking about it, is this actually my favourite book of the year? Potentially. But the book I have decided is my favourite book of the year, I'm going to stick to my guns, is The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. And this book was the perfect melting pot of the ingredients for a 5-star read. Quality-wise, it was excellent. In terms of reaction that it elicited from me, it got me in my feelings. It got me thinking. The actual reading experience of it was so joyous. Like, I read this from cover to cover on one morning. I could not put this book down. I also feel this kind of nostalgic, sentimental connection to this book because I did buy it while we were in New York, and that just feels quite special to me. Anyway, so in this book, we are following Lucy. Lucy is a 26-year-old teaching assistant who loves sharing the joy and the pleasure of reading with her students. But there is one student in particular called Christopher. He is 7 years old, and Lucy really wants to adopt Christopher. He doesn't have parents. She really wants to be able to give him a loving and caring home, but Lucy's just not in the financial position where she would be able to do that. She's living in a house share. She could not have a kid in her current, lifestyle. Now, one of the things that she and Christopher really bond over is a shared love for this children's magical series that Lucy loved when she was a child. And that is the Clock Island series by Jack Masterton. Just before Lucy has decided that she will have to give up on this dream of adopting Christopher, Jack Masterton, who has become this kind of enigmatic, mysterious author, announces after several years he has written a new book in the Clock Tower series. And he is running this competition where people will be brought together in his home to compete to basically win the manuscript of this book. So the person that wins this competition will have access to the rights of this manuscript, and they can do essentially whatever they want with it. But a huge appeal of it is that they would be able to sell the manuscript to Jack's publisher and get a hell of a lot of money. It's life-changing money, the money that would give Lucy the stability to be able to adopt Christopher. Lucy is one of the 4 competitors invited to try and gain access to this manuscript, and immediately when she gets there, the vibes are weird. It's very mysterious. It's very strange. And I loved that kind of uncanny, unsettling atmosphere. The author character of Jack was somewhere between a creepy Lemony Snicket-esque character with kind of the Wizard of Oz mixed in. And the general feeling that I had around this book was it felt like a middle grade novel, but with grown-up characters exploring grown-up themes. And that was such a real sweet spot for me. And over the years, I have enjoyed a number of books that have this kind of exploration of our childhood reading from an adult perspective. And the adoration for reading that sang through the pages of this book was just gorgeous to me. So this is my favourite book of 2024.
Oops, this is editing Leanne, who has now realised that I forgot to talk about the honourable mentions for books that I read for work in 2024. So, the books that I read for work in 2024 that I absolutely adored are Skandar and the Chaos Trials and Skandar and the Skeleton Curse, both by A.F. Stedman, The Ice Apprentices by Jacob North, and Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. That last one in particular, oh my god, I don't know how I have made it through nearly 3 decades of my life having not read that book. It was so phenomenal.
I think now that I've spoken through the list, I think most of these were really fantastic 4 stars. But in terms of books that would go on an all-time favorite shelves, I think Homestretch and The Wishing Game just peek their head above the other books on this list. Let me know down in the comments if you read any of these books and what you thought of them. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite book of the year was. If you want to let me know you're here but you don't have anything in particular to say, leave me a star or sparkle emoji. Anyways, that's it from me. I hope you're well, and I'll speak to you in my next video.